They laughed when I married the Duke, twice my age, but his love became my miracle. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The grand hall of Wren Manor glowed under 100 golden chandeliers, but all Elara could feel was the weight of every stair burning into her back. The orchestra had gone quiet the moment she stepped in, her ivory gown brushing against the marble floor, a single breath away from the man twice her age, Alexander Wren, the Duke of Ashbourne. Whispers slithered through the crowd, like wind through broken glass. She's what, 24? He could be her father. Poor thing must be desperate. Elara heard every word, each one slicing deeper than the last. Yet she stood tall, her chin slightly raised, her fingers trembling only where no one could see. The Duke's gloved hand extended toward her, steady and sure. His eyes, gray like winter rain, met hers, not cold, not cruel, just unreadable. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, voice smooth and deep. She nodded, though her throat was tight. "Yes, Your Grace." Cameras flashed as the officiant began. Outside the manor, the press had gathered like vultures. Inside, every noble guest watched with fascination or disdain, waiting for this young commoner to make a fool of herself. But Elara's mind wasn't on the whispers or the jewels glinting around her. It was on the hospital invoice folded inside her purse, and her brother's frail voice on the phone the night before. "Ellie, don't do anything crazy, please." The Duke's vows were crisp, practiced. A man who had faced courts, wars, and countless rumors. Hers came out softer, trembling like the flame of a candle about to go out. When he slipped the ring on her finger, a band of silver, not gold, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then laughter, soft at first, then rippling louder across the ballroom. A waitress turned duchess. Someone mocked under their breath. "How long until he tires of her?" Elara's lips curved into the smallest of smiles, though her chest ached. She looked at the Duke beside her, expecting indifference. Instead, he glanced down and said quietly, only for her to hear, "Ignore them. They laughed at me once too." His words caught her off guard. For a moment, she saw something flicker behind his composed expression, loneliness, maybe, or pain long buried. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the applause was hesitant, almost mocking. Alexander offered his arm, and Elara took it. Together, they walked down the aisle between chandeliers and judgment. Each step echoed like a drumbeat against the marble floor, and in her mind, she repeated the same silent prayer. "This isn't about love. It's survival. Just 1 year. 1 year, and I'll be free." But as the Duke's steady presence guided her through the storm of whispers, she couldn't ignore the strange warmth that pulsed beneath her fear. It wasn't love, not yet, but something in his quiet composure felt like shelter. And that terrified her more than the laughter ever could. The laughter from the ballroom still echoed in Elara's mind long after the car doors closed. The Duke's chauffeur drove them through the foggy countryside toward Wren Manor, the engine humming like a quiet secret. Elara sat stiffly beside Alexander, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Outside, the rain had begun again, drumming softly on the windows. "You handled yourself well," Alexander said at last, his tone even, almost detached. She forced a smile. "I was just trying not to trip." His lips twitched, maybe almost a smile, but then the moment passed. The rest of the ride was silent except for the rain and the soft hiss of tires on gravel. When the car finally stopped before the massive gates of the estate, Elara stared up at the manor's towers, stone, silver, and shadow. She swallowed hard. This was her new home, but it felt like someone else's story. Inside, a maid led her to a grand bedroom with velvet drapes and a bed big enough for a family. On the dresser lay a jewelry box carved with the Wren crest. She touched it lightly, but did not open it. Everything looked perfect, expensive, cold. Downstairs, she heard muffled voices, staff gossip traveling faster than footsteps. "The new Duchess? So young. They say it is just a contract. Did you see her dress?" Elara closed the door quietly and sat on the edge of the bed. The ring on her finger glimmered faintly in the candlelight. 1 year, she whispered to herself. Just 1 year. She lay down, but sleep would not come. When morning broke, Sunlight spilled across the room like gold she did not deserve. A knock on the door startled her. "Breakfast is served in the east parlor, Your Grace." It was Margaret, the head maid. Her tone was polite but clipped, the way people speak when they are not sure if they should bow or sneer. Elara nodded, smoothing the wrinkles from her simple ivory gown before descending the staircase. The Duke was already at the long table, reading a folded newspaper. He did not look up when she entered. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied without lifting his gaze. Steam curled from a silver teapot. The silence stretched between them until she finally asked, "Do you regret it yet, marrying me?" His eyes flicked up then, gray and unreadable. "Do you?" "No," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Because at least now my brother can stay in treatment." His gaze softened slightly, the smallest crack in his armor. "That is why you said yes?" She nodded. "Why did you ask me?" He folded the newspaper and set it aside. "Because you did not ask for anything in return." Elara blinked, unsure how to respond. Before she could, a footman entered with a stack of letters. "These came for you, Your Grace." Alexander took them, flipped through the envelopes, then paused. "One for you, Duchess." He slid a single envelope toward her. Her heart jumped. No one wrote to her except her brother. She tore it open, eyes racing over the words. It was from the hospital. Her brother's surgery had been approved. She let out a breath she had been holding for weeks, her eyes glistening. Alexander watched quietly as she whispered, "Thank you." He said nothing, only reached for his tea. But there was something in the way his hand trembled, almost imperceptibly, as if holding back more than words. Later that day, as she wandered through the manor's library, Elara found shelves lined with books older than the country itself. She ran her fingers along the spines and stopped at a faded photograph framed in silver, a younger Alexander standing beside a woman with dark hair and kind eyes. She was laughing. Elara felt a pang in her chest. The Duke's late wife, she guessed. That night, when she passed by his study, she heard the faint notes of a piano. She peeked through the half-open door. Alexander sat alone, playing softly, his posture straight but his expression weary. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a memory of something that could never return. For the first time since the wedding, Elara saw the man behind the title, not just the Duke, but a soul stitched together by grief and restraint. She stepped back quietly, not wanting to intrude, yet unable to forget the sound. In that moment she realized something she had not expected. Beneath all the rumors and laughter, both of them were living on borrowed time. Days at Wren Manor began to settle into a strange rhythm. Every morning, Elara would join Alexander for breakfast in the sunlit parlor, a room that smelled faintly of old books and lavender polish. They rarely spoke at first. The clink of cutlery filled the silence where conversation should have lived. But small things began to change. One morning, she noticed how he set her teacup slightly to the left, remembering that she was left-handed. Another day, she saw him pause before the fireplace, watching her sketch the rose garden through the window. "You draw," he said quietly. "Not well," she replied, hiding the paper. He tilted his head. "Then you draw honestly." That night, she stayed awake thinking about that single line. The next afternoon she visited the garden with her sketchbook again. The late autumn air was crisp, and the sky hung low with soft gray clouds. She sat beneath a stone arch covered in vines, sketching the outline of the fountain. A gentle cough startled her. Alexander stood a few feet away, holding 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might like something warm," he said. She accepted it with both hands, her fingers brushing his for an instant. The warmth of the cup spread through her like sunlight. "You do not have to keep pretending for me, you know," she murmured after a while. "Pretending what?" "That this arrangement is easy." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "It is easier than being alone." The words hung between them like mist. From that day, something quiet but steady began to form trust, maybe, or the early shadow of affection. They started walking the gardens together in the evenings. He told her about the land, the history of each marble statue, and the library he built after his wife's passing. She loved books, he said once, his voice lower than usual. She believed stories were the only way to live 1,000 lives. Elara nodded, listening, sensing the ache behind his calm. In return, she spoke of her brother, of the tiny apartment they once shared above a bakery, of their mother who taught them to make soup from almost nothing. For the first time she saw Alexander smile, not the polite, public smile he wore for the world, but something softer, unguarded. "You have a way of making emptiness sound full," he said. She laughed, and for a fleeting second, the years between them vanished. But the outside world was not so kind. At the next charity luncheon, whispers followed her again, sharper now that the novelty had faded. "The Duchess thinks she belongs," one woman sneered behind her fan. "A pet project for a lonely widower." Elara felt her stomach tighten, but before she could slip away, Alexander's hand found hers under the table. "Do not look at them," he said softly. "Look at me." And she did. Later that night, she found herself standing on the balcony outside her room, the manor lights glowing below. The stars were faint behind drifting clouds. She thought about the cruel laughter, about how every step she took in this life felt like walking a thin bridge between gratitude and humiliation. She did not hear Alexander approach until his voice broke the quiet. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No. But sometimes I wonder if I deserve any of this." He stepped closer, his tone firm yet gentle. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. You are here because you said yes, because you have courage most people will never know." She looked up at him, the wind brushing a strand of hair across her face. "And you, Your Grace? What keeps you here?" His answer was a whisper, almost lost to the night air. "Maybe the hope that someone might still see me, not the title, not the age, just me." Their eyes met, and for the first time, silence felt safe. When she finally turned to go inside, he caught her hand briefly. "Good night, Elara." Her name sounded different when he said it, like a promise neither of them had planned to make. That night, she placed her sketchbook on the bedside table and drew not the garden, but his hand holding hers. The faint outline of two lives beginning to intertwine. Winter arrived early that year, draping Wren Manor in frost and silence. The once vibrant gardens were now silver with ice, and the lake behind the estate had turned into a mirror for the gray sky above. Elara had grown used to the rhythm of life there, the sound of Alexander's footsteps echoing through the marble halls, the warmth of tea at dusk, the quiet exchanges that had become their language. What began as a contract was starting to feel like something real, something neither of them dared to name. One morning she found him in the library, standing before the large window where the light fell just right on his hair. He was holding a letter, his brow tense. "Bad news?" she asked gently. He folded it quickly. "Just business," he said, but the way his hand trembled gave him away. "You are not well," she murmured. "Do not lie to me." Alexander sighed, the sound deep and weary. "It is nothing, just the cold." Yet that night, when she passed by his study again, she heard him coughing violently, a sound so raw that it sent chills through her. She opened the door without knocking. He was leaning against the desk, pale, breath short. "Alexander," she whispered, rushing to his side. He waved her off weakly. "I am fine. You are not." She helped him sit, her hands firm despite his protests. For a man who commanded nations and men, he looked suddenly fragile, human. She fetched water, pressed a cloth to his forehead, and when he finally stopped resisting, he looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, something close to gratitude, or maybe surrender. "You should not care this much," he said hoarsely. "Why not?" she asked softly. "Because I do not deserve it." Her voice steadied. "Maybe that is not your choice anymore." From that night on, she made sure he ate, that he rested, that someone was there to remind him he was not alone. The staff began to notice. So did the world outside. Rumors shifted from mockery to intrigue. Newspapers called her the Duchess who changed the Duke. Invitations arrived for charity events, interviews, portraits. But Alexander rarely left the manor now. He claimed to dislike attention, though Elara sensed the truth was deeper. His health was fading. Still, every evening, they would sit by the fire. She would read aloud while he listened, sometimes pretending to work, sometimes just watching her. One night, as snowflakes brushed the window pane, she looked up from her book and caught him staring. "What?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Nothing. I was just wondering when this house stopped feeling empty." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that she had wondered the same thing, that she had not realized how lonely she was until she met someone even lonelier. But before she could speak, a sharp knock interrupted them. It was the estate steward, carrying a newspaper. Your Grace, you might want to see this. The headline stretched across the page. Asterisk, contract marriage scandal. The Duke's Duchess exposed. Asterisk, Elara froze. Beneath the headline was a photograph her and Alexander at the charity luncheon, holding hands. The article claimed she had married him for money, quoting anonymous sources from the manor. Who would do this? She whispered, her throat dry. Alexander's expression hardened. Someone who profits from destroying reputations. It is not true, she said quickly. You know that. I do, he replied quietly. But the world will not care. The next few days were chaos. Letters poured in from reporters, invitations were rescinded, whispers turned cruel again. Elara tried to ignore them, but the weight of shame pressed heavy on her chest. She found herself avoiding the mirror, avoiding the Duke. One night, she slipped into the garden alone. The snow was knee-deep, and the fountain was frozen solid. She looked up at the stars, her breath visible in the cold air. "What have I done?" she whispered. She did not hear Alexander approach until his coat settled over her shoulders. "You stood beside me when the world laughed," he said softly. "Now it is my turn." She turned toward him, eyes wide with tears. "They will never stop." "Then let them talk," he said. "We know the truth." For a moment, she believed him. But as she looked into his tired face, she saw something that frightened her more than the rumors, the quiet resignation of a man who was running out of time. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm made of whispers. Wren Manor had never seemed so vast or so cold. Elara tried to keep her head high as staff avoided her gaze, their curtsies slower, their smiles forced. The newspapers had called her a fraud, a gold digger, a scandal to the noble house she had married into. Every cruel headline seemed to echo through the marble corridors, yet Alexander said nothing in his defense. He withdrew into his study, working longer hours, coughing harder each night. When Elara finally confronted him, his voice was thin but firm. "It will fade. Scandals always do." "At what cost?" she asked, standing near the fire. "They are destroying you." He gave a faint smile. "I was already fading before they started printing lies." She felt anger and fear twist inside her. "Why did you not tell me about your illness?" He looked at her then, eyes heavy with truth. "Because I did not want you to stay out of pity." Her throat tightened. "You think I am here because of duty? You think I do not care?" He turned away, staring into the flames. "I do not know what to think anymore." The room went quiet except for the crackle of burning wood. Elara wanted to scream, but instead she whispered, "You stubborn man. You gave me your name, your world, and yet you think I would not fight for you." That night, she stayed outside his study until the early hours, refusing to leave even when the staff tried to escort her away. When morning came, she found a small note slipped under her door. It was written in his familiar hand, asterisk. "If you wish to help me, Elara, live beyond this house. Do not let my mistakes chain you." Asterisk. The next day, she discovered he had left for London without her. Panic took hold. No one knew exactly why he went or where he stayed. For 3 days, she searched every address connected to his business until finally, at a small private hospital near the city's edge, she found him weak, pale, hooked to a monitor, his heartbeat steady but faint. "You should not have come," he murmured as she entered. She ignored him, sitting by his side and taking his hand. "You should have told me," she said softly. "You cannot fight alone." For the first time, he did not argue. His fingers tightened around hers. "You were supposed to be free," he whispered. "You are my freedom," she replied. Weeks passed as he remained under care. Elara never left his side. She wrote letters to every journalist who had smeared his name, providing proof of his charitable foundations, his quiet donations to orphanages and hospitals. Gradually, the tone of the headlines shifted. Asterisk. The Duchess who defied the scandal. Asterisk, asterisk. Love or loyalty. The truth behind the Duke and his wife. Asterisk. Public sympathy began to turn. When Alexander was finally strong enough to return home, spring had come again to Wren Manor. The garden was alive with roses and sunlight, the same place where their first quiet moments had begun. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, his steps uneven but determined. "I am told you silenced the entire London press," he said with a faint grin. "Not silence," she corrected gently. "I just reminded them who you are." He looked at her, eyes softer now, free of the guarded weight they once carried. "And who are you, Elara?" She smiled through tears. A woman who stopped pretending she did not love her husband. He reached for her hand, and she let him. They stood together under the arch of climbing roses, their fingers entwined, the afternoon sun spilling over them like gold. "They laughed when we married," he said, his voice steady. "They still do," she teased softly. "Then let them," he replied, "because they will never understand that you were my miracle." And when he pulled her close, she knew the laughter outside those walls no longer mattered. For the first time since the day she walked into that ballroom, Elara was not surviving a bargain. She was living a love that had become real. Summer came to Wren Manor like a quiet promise. The air was softer now, carrying the scent of lilacs and the distant hum of life returning. The press had long since moved on to new scandals, and the laughter that once haunted their names had finally faded into silence. Elara spent her mornings walking the garden paths with Alexander, helping him regain strength one careful step at a time. He had traded grand meetings for simple routines: letters by the window, tea by the fountain, a slow smile when she entered the room. The doctors called his recovery miraculous, but Elara knew it was not medicine alone that had saved him. It was the stubborn will of a man who finally had a reason to live. One afternoon, she found him in the study, sketching on the corner of a newspaper. She laughed softly. "I thought I was the artist in this house." He looked up with mock seriousness. "You have inspired competition." When she leaned closer, she saw a rough drawing of the manor gardens, two small figures seated by the fountain. "That looks familiar," she said. "It should," he replied. "It is us." The simplicity of it made her heart swell. She touched the edge of the paper, careful not to smudge the pencil lines. "You never told me you could draw." He smiled faintly. "I could not, until you gave me something worth remembering." His words lingered long after he left the room. That night, while the manor slept, Elara stood by the same fountain, listening to the water trickle beneath the stars. For the first time since her marriage began, she felt peace, not the cold kind born from endurance, but the warm, fragile kind that comes after surviving the storm. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of footsteps. Alexander joined her, his coat draped loosely around his shoulders. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you," he answered. They stood side by side, the silence between them no longer heavy. "I used to think love was for the young," he said quietly. "But you taught me that love is for the brave." Elara looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I used to think happiness was something you had to earn. Now I know it is something you give." He took her hand then, their fingers intertwining in the silver light. "Do you remember the contract we signed?" he asked. She nodded. It had 3 rules. He smiled. "Let us make a new one. Just one rule, no more pretending." Her eyes glistened. "Agreed." For weeks after, the manor filled with laughter again. Elara reopened the charity foundation in his name, turning the scandal that once humiliated them into a force for good. She visited hospitals, funded art classes for children, and helped families who had once stood where she had on the edge of despair. Alexander would watch her speak to crowds, his chest swelling with quiet pride. When they returned home, he would tease her gently. "The Duchess of Wren, savior of the poor. I might be jealous." She would smile. "You should be proud." "I am," he admitted, "but I am prouder that you chose to stay." The summer drifted into autumn, painting the trees gold. One morning, a letter arrived from the Royal Council, inviting them both to a gala celebrating acts of compassion across the nation. It was the same society that had once mocked them, now eager to celebrate their grace. Elara hesitated, but Alexander insisted. Let them see what love looks like when it survives. On the night of the gala, they entered arm in arm. The same hall that once echoed with laughter now filled with applause. Reporters snapped photographs, but for once, neither of them flinched. Elara wore a simple silver gown. Alexander, his old tailored suit. When the host raised a glass and called their names, the crowd stood. "To the Duke and Duchess of Wren," he declared. "Proof that dignity cannot be bought, and love cannot be measured." Alexander leaned close and whispered, "They finally stopped laughing." Elara smiled, her eyes shimmering under the lights. "No," she said softly. "They just started understanding." And as the orchestra began to play, he took her hand, leading her into a slow dance. each step a quiet testament to everything they had endured and everything they had become. The gala marked a new beginning for them, but life has a way of testing love just when it begins to feel safe. The morning after the celebration, Wren Manor woke to the sound of bells ringing from the village below. Alexander was in his study, writing letters of gratitude to those who had supported their foundation, when a sharp pain cut through his chest. His pen slipped from his fingers, leaving a dark streak across the paper. He steadied himself against the desk, waiting for the pain to fade, but it only deepened. When Elara entered moments later, carrying tea, she froze at the sight of him clutching his chest. "Alexander!" she cried, rushing forward. "I am fine," he forced out, but his voice betrayed him. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor. Within minutes, the staff had called the doctor. The manor turned into a flurry of movement, but Elara could only sit beside him, holding his trembling hand. "Stay with me," she whispered again and again. When the doctor emerged hours later, his face was grave. "He needs rest, absolute rest. The heart cannot endure more strain." Elara nodded numbly. For the first time in months, fear returned like a shadow. That night, she sat by his bedside, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. The same man who had once stood unshakable before the world now looked fragile beneath the soft glow of the lamp. She brushed his hair back gently, whispering, "You promised me a lifetime." His eyes opened halfway, and he smiled faintly. "Then I will keep that promise, even if it takes all of me." Days blurred into weeks as she became both wife and caretaker. She read to him from his favorite books, brought sunlight into the room, and filled the air with laughter he could hear even from his bed. But in the quiet hours of the night, when he slept, she would stand by the window and cry silently, terrified of a future without him. One afternoon, while sorting through his papers, she discovered a sealed envelope marked with her name. Her heart pounded as she broke the wax. Inside was a letter written in his elegant hand, **. My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, it means I have gone where your voice cannot reach for now. But do not grieve me. My love for you has already done what medicine could not. It kept me alive long enough to know what real happiness feels like. Promise me one thing. Keep our foundation alive. Let it be our child in this world. **. The letter trembled in her hands. She pressed it to her heart, whispering, "You will not leave me, not like this." That night, she returned to his side and told him about the letter. His eyes glistened. "You found it," he said softly. "Then you know what I want most." "Yes," she said, "but I am not ready to say goodbye." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Then do not. Just promise me you will live." The days grew shorter, and though his body weakened, his spirit remained. On the first snow of winter, Elara woke to find him sitting by the window, gazing at the falling flakes. "Do you remember," he said, "when you first arrived here, you hated the cold?" She smiled sadly. "I hated everything then except your tea." He chuckled softly, a sound so faint she feared it would vanish with the wind. "You brought warmth into a house that forgot how to feel. Even if I do not wake tomorrow, I will never stop being grateful." She knelt beside him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You will wake. We still have forever." He looked at her with the gentlest expression she had ever seen. "Forever," he echoed, closing his eyes as she held him close. The snow kept falling outside, each flake a quiet reminder that love, once real, never truly ends. The morning after the first snow was eerily still. The world outside Wren Manor glowed white and untouched, as if holding its breath. Inside, Elara sat beside Alexander's bed, her hand resting over his. His skin was cool, his breathing shallow but steady. The doctor had left hours ago, leaving behind a quiet warning his condition was fragile, the next few days uncertain. Elara refused to move from his side. She watched the way the pale light caught on his silver hair, the faint rise and fall of his chest. "You promised me forever," she whispered, "so I will hold you to it." As if hearing her, his fingers twitched against hers. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing that same gray calm she had come to know. "I am still here," he murmured, his voice faint but clear. She smiled through tears. "And you are not allowed to leave." He gave a soft laugh, the sound weak but alive. "You are stubborn, Duchess." "I learn from you," she replied. For the next several days, Elara turned the manor into a sanctuary of care. The fireplaces stayed lit, The halls smelled of chamomile and honey, and she read to him for hours stories of courage, of miracles, of love that refused to die. Sometimes he would listen in silence. Other times he would interrupt with quiet humor. "You always pick the stories where the hero survives," he teased once. She met his gaze and said softly, "Because I still believe mine will." But as the week went on, Alexander's strength wavered. One evening she found him watching her with an expression both tender and sad. "Elara," he said, "you have given me more time than anyone thought possible. I need you to promise me something." "Anything," she whispered. "When I am gone, do not hide here. The world needs your light. Continue what we built, help others find their second chances." She shook her head fiercely. "Do not speak as if you are already gone." He reached up and brushed away her tears. "Promise me," he said again. Reluctantly, she nodded. "I promise." That night he drifted in and out of sleep, his breath shallow but peaceful. Elara stayed beside him, her fingers tracing the lines of his hand as she hummed softly under her breath. Just before dawn he stirred. "Elara," he whispered. "Yes, my love. Do you remember the first time we danced?" She smiled faintly. "At the gala. You stepped on my foot." "I did," he said, his lips curling into a small smile. "And you still stayed." "I always will." He exhaled slowly, his eyes closing. "Then I can rest now." The sun rose gently over the horizon, spilling gold across the bed. Elara felt the moment the world changed the way his hand grew still, the quiet that followed. For a long time she did not cry. She simply held him, her tears falling only when the light touched his face. The funeral was held 3 days later in the chapel on the hill behind the manor. Snow fell again, soft and silent, covering the earth like a blessing. People came from across the country, benefactors, workers, villagers, all the lives Alexander had quietly changed. When it was her turn to speak, Elara stood before them, the wind tugging at her veil. "They laughed when I married him," she said, her voice steady. "But love is not measured in years or wealth. It is measured in moments of kindness, in the courage to stay when others would leave. He gave me that courage, and I will spend the rest of my life giving it to others." Her words carried over the crowd, through the cold air, into the valley beyond. When the ceremony ended, she placed a single white rose on his casket. "Until we meet again," she whispered. As she walked away, the wind lifted around her like a quiet promise. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of the vow she had made, to turn grief into grace and love into legacy. A year passed since the snow-covered morning when the Duke of Wren took his final breath. The manor no longer felt like a house of mourning but a place of quiet rebirth. Spring had returned, painting the gardens in colors that Alexander would have loved. Elara stood on the balcony overlooking the rose fields, the wind carrying the scent of life through the air. The Wren Foundation had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. What had begun as a small act of love between two unlikely souls had become a national movement of compassion, helping countless families find hope again. Every letter of thanks she received was a reminder that his promise lived on. The newspapers that once mocked her now called her the widow who built a legacy. But she never cared about titles. Every project, every smile she saw, was her way of speaking to him again. That afternoon she walked to the art wing of the manor, where sunlight streamed through tall windows onto a new exhibition. The walls were lined with paintings and sketches her work, and his. At the center hung a portrait she had painted from memory. Alexander, sitting by the window with that familiar half-smile, looking not at the world but at her. Beneath it a brass plaque read asterisk, "To the man who taught me that love is not a contract but a choice." Asterisk. As she adjusted the flowers beneath the portrait, footsteps echoed behind her. Margaret, the longtime maid, entered with a warm smile. "The visitors are arriving, Your Grace." Elara nodded gently. "Let them in." Soon, the gallery filled with families the foundation had helped, students from the art school she opened in his name, and even those who once whispered behind her back. They looked around in awe, touched by the story told through every frame. One little girl approached Elara shyly, holding a sketchbook. "Ma'am, my mother said you help people who have lost someone. My dad passed away last year. It hurts less when I draw him." Elara knelt to meet her eyes, her voice soft but steady. "Then keep drawing, sweetheart. Love never really leaves, it just changes shape." The girl smiled, hugging her before running off toward the crowd. When the hall grew quiet again, Elara walked back to the garden. The sun was setting, bathing the roses in gold. She sat by the fountain where she and Alexander had once shared tea, the same spot where laughter had replaced loneliness. Pulling a small leather-bound journal from her shawl, she opened to the first page. It was the last letter he had ever written her. The ink had faded, but the words still burned with life. Asterisk. My dearest Elara, when you see the first bloom of spring, know that it is my heart reminding you to live, to smile, to keep going. Asterisk. She traced the handwriting with trembling fingers. You kept your promise, she whispered, and I am keeping mine. A gust of wind brushed through the garden, scattering petals across the water. For a moment she could almost hear his voice, low and warm, saying her name. Standing slowly, she placed the journal beside the fountain. For the next generation, she said softly. For every heart that still believes in miracles. As twilight deepened, the manor's lights flickered on one by one, glowing like stars across the stone walls. In the distance, the bells from the village rang soft, steady, eternal. Elara turned toward the sound, her lips curling into a peaceful smile. The world had once laughed at their love, but now it carried their story in every echo of kindness. Love had outlived its doubters. It had become something greater, a living promise, forever written into the heart of Wren Manor. And as the final light of day slipped beyond the hills, she whispered to the sky, You were my miracle, Alexander, and I will spend every day being yours.